This story takes place on a parcel of land that was owned by my dad and a business partner. It was essentially vacant, although we had taken on a few tenants who needed space to store old sailboats or store industrial machinery. Being in a somewhat remote area, we were not immune to trespassers, and tenants would tell us about stolen tools or machinery parts often. This is where we met Dan. Dan came to my father much in the same way many others did. He had a boat restoration business and needed a place to work. He also asked if it would be okay if he slept on the property a few nights a week, under the guise of it saving him time commuting if he worked late on a project. This was mutually beneficial, as Dan seemed like a decent guy, and it would be nice to have a presence there overnight. We let him have a reduced rental rate as compensation for him generally keeping an eye on the place. A few months later, Dan had built himself a little compound, a series of 3 sea containers in a horseshoe configuration, with a little trailer in the middle. Over the same period of time, we noticed that Dan didn't seem to work. There were never boats there, and Dan's "a few nights a week" became every night. Soon after, the excuses for why he didn't have rent started coming in. Effectively, we had invited a squatter into our property. Dan became the same people we wanted to keep out. Trying to look on the bright side, my dad and his partner were still okay with this, as it was beneficial to have someone there at all hours. The theft had gone down substantially, and Dan's rent, even when paid in full, was not tipping any financial needles for us, so we let it be for the time. About a year later, Dan's mental health was starting to show its cracks. He went from polite to aggressive and bitter. He wasn't violent and was always courteous to me personally. I was 23 at the time. But when he was asked about money and back rent, he would get defensive and start blaming my dad and his partner for why he couldn't pay. My dad wasn't afraid of anybody, but Dan made him nervous. My dad's partner had a friend who had recently dealt with a similar renter-turned-squatter situation, and when he called the police for assistance, he was thanked by the squatter with a bullet in his stomach. A few $1,000s back rent or an eviction was not worth a gunshot to my dad, and we all felt that Dan was capable of snapping that way. So we just kept Dan busy by doing cleanup and random tasks, which he always did, and remarkably well. One day, my dad asked me to run up to the site for him as he was out of town. A tenant had called because it looked like someone had tried to cut through a piece of our fence, and we wanted to get eyes on it. I pulled into the property where I was greeted by Dan. "Hey buddy," he yelled and waved. Dan was always very respectful to me, a courtesy of which he had stopped showing my dad and his partner some time ago. "Hey Dan," I yelled back as I parked and got out of my car. "Come check this out," Dan replied, and waved for me to step inside his little compound area. I was dying to see what was going on in there, honestly. I knew Dan was off, but I never felt intimidated or in any danger. Just another weird guy. I walked over, and Dan brought me next to one of the sea containers. Check this out. The sea container had a roll-up door on the side, instead of the typical latch and swing doors on the end. He rolls up the door to a wall. I look closer, and he has welded a metal wall 2 feet into the sea container. "What am I looking at, Dan?" "Skirt down the pathway to the left," he says and points. I look down the narrow pathway and see a small opening at the end, maybe 4 feet high and 3 feet wide. Check it out. I really should not have gone in, but again, curiosity and that feeling of invincibility you have as a 23-year-old overshadowed my better judgment. I squeezed down the hall and through the door into the main hold of the sea container. The interior was painted deep red. Shag carpet had been poorly glued to the ground. On every wall and surface, broken pieces of mirror had been glued, and in the back, an old-style prison door had been welded in place, and behind it, a small round bed with shiny satin sheets. There are times when you can't really believe what you're seeing is real. The sensory overload of this enclosed place was too much. I don't know how long I stood there, but was snapped back to reality when Dan, standing right behind me, says, "I love to party in here." I hadn't even realized he followed me in. One good piece of advice my dad gave me when dealing with tricky situations was, always play along as long as you're safe until a moment comes that you can get away fast and safely. I ran through the scenarios. I had done MMA and kickboxing in college. I'm not a small guy, but neither was Dan. Do I punch him and run and risk God knows what? Are there weapons hidden in here? I decided for the path of least resistance. Wow, Dan, this place is sick. I bet with some weed and some good music, you could spend hours back here. Yeah, man, you should come back and we can hang in here together. It'll be wild. His face softened, like he had just found a new friend who got it. Look, Dan, I want to hang bad, but I came here to meet my dad, and he should be pulling up right now, so I have to go meet him. Dan shrugged, and I walked past him, squeezing through pathways until I was back outside. I calmly walked to my car, got in, and left. I relayed the story to my dad and his partner, who thought it was odd, but due to the fear of potential violence from Dan, we didn't call the authorities. Both my dad and his partner weren't certain that Dan didn't know our home addresses. We did, however, keep a very close eye on Dan, and actually brought in another tenant to stay the night and keep an eye on both Dan and the property. Eventually, Dan decided to move on. One day, we showed up and his containers were being loaded onto a shipper, but he was nowhere to be found. He had moved on, leaving behind only sea container footprints and 3 dumpsters worth of garbage. I told the police the story soon after, along with his name, and they said they would keep their ears out, but not knowing where he went or if Dan was even his real name, there wasn't much they could do. In the time since, we've never had a visit or heard from Dan. The only people I told this story to were my paintball friends at work, who had practiced with me on the property and knew Dan since we were always there, and coined his nickname, Sex Dungeon Dan.
I used to work in a strip mall out in a fairly rural area. Most people are recognizable, even if you don't know them personally. People from out of the area frequently stop on their way through to other towns, so it's not like they're never out-of-towners, just that they may not be easy to spot. Like many places, we have a few homeless folks that hang around the shopping center, and they occasionally ask people for change or food. It can be a nuisance, but the folks that worked at the shops kind of kept an eye on them to help them out, or to keep track of how they're doing. There's this one guy named Shane that, over the course of years, has slowly gotten in worse and worse shape. He'd be filthy and was clearly not doing well mentally, and was usually intoxicated. He always had several layers of clothing, and the pants that he wore on the outside of his other pants always sagged, making it hard for him to walk. He'd go missing for days and then show up again. We'd wonder what happened to Shane and ask around a bit, and a few days later, he'd appear again. He was always so dirty. I always wished there was a way we could get him some help, but I really didn't know what to do. One day I was out in the major city that's about 80 or so miles away from where I work. I happened to see a very well-dressed, very well-groomed gentleman that looked exactly like Shane, but at that moment I figured my eyes were deceiving me. This guy has an expensive-looking shoulder bag, a new iPhone, and an Apple Watch. We were both in line at a popular food truck, and it was usually a long wait to order and get your food. Most people just mind their business and scroll on their phones while waiting. This guy, on the other hand, is staring daggers at me. I keep avoiding looking that way, but I keep glancing to see if he's still there. And at the same time, I want to look at him because I'm so curious about how much he looks like Shane. I glance his way and I have to stumble back because he's practically right up against me. He has such intense eyes. He sort of whispers to me, but really intensely, and tells me he knows where I'm from and what shop I work at. He gets closer and I can tell he smells good, and I could even smell his minty breath. I ask how he knows and he just smiles. I ask again and he smiles brighter, exposing a perfectly clean set of teeth, minus one tooth. I'm almost positive Shane is missing that tooth. I edge away, feeling more than a little uncomfortable. His order gets called up, but they say his name is James. The next few days I don't see Shane anywhere around the shopping center, and I ask around and no one had seen him for days. Someone says they hope he's okay. Another person shrugs and says they wish they could do something to help him. The next day, there he is, filthy as ever, grimy teeth, dirty fingernails, and wearing all his layers. He sits on the curb outside my shop and asks people for change. I decide to venture out and confront him. I'm 100% sure it's him, but I don't understand how he could get so filthy and smelly in such a short time. I ask him if he was in the city, and he looks at me through bloodshot eyes and mumbles that he'll kill me if I tell anyone. This takes me aback, and I look at him puzzled. He slurs again that he'll kill me if I tell anyone that he's not actually homeless. He starts to get worked up, and I ended up calling the police because I didn't know at that point what he was capable of. He wandered off, and I haven't seen him since.
This story is told from the perspective of a man. The incident happened just a few hours earlier, and I'm typing this story currently at my workplace. I work in the garden area of a home improvement store. I don't work the cash registers, and my manager doesn't even let me water the flowers, so a lot of the time I have nothing to do. This results in me taking extremely long bathroom breaks where I just scroll on my phone. I know it sounds bad, but it's better than standing around trying to look busy. Today was the same as any other, with me wasting time in the bathroom. Nothing of interest happened until my work phone buzzed at the same time as the stall next to mine. This becomes important later. A few seconds later, I see that the guy in the next stall has his hand stretched to the ground with his palm facing up. I at first thought he had run out of toilet paper and was asking for mine. He just stayed silent for a while, so I ignored him after that. Then he started moving that hand uncomfortably close to my leg, so I immediately scooted away and prepared to leave. Once the man noticed that, he hurriedly got out of his stall before I could leave. Another few seconds of silence. I took a peek out from the gap of the stall door to see what the hell he was doing, and just like a scene from a horror movie, our eyes connected. He was barely an inch away from my door, trying to peek inside. My blood ran cold. If you're wondering why I didn't immediately open the door and cuss the guy out, I really hate confrontation. I avoid it wherever possible, and I do my best not to draw attention to myself. I stood sideways by the door, so he wouldn't be able to see me. That's when the whispering started. I don't know what the first thing he said was, but it sounded like moaning. The next part was a bit more audible. He said something along the lines of wanting to see more of my unflushed toilet paper. I was thoroughly disgusted. This guy was a complete creep, and I was alone in the bathroom with him. My heart was beating faster by the second. I knew I had to stay there until another person came into the bathroom. No way was I going to confront him alone. Probably a minute later, someone finally arrives, and I take this as my chance to wash my hands and get the hell out of there. Thankfully, the presence of the other person made the old man quit his creepy behavior. As I was about to leave, he blocked my path for a second before stepping aside. The weird thing was, I don't even think he works at the store because he wasn't wearing any vest. My store is extremely lenient about uniform, but most workers at least wear a vest or something connected to the store. He just looked like a regular customer. I'm certain I heard the phone dings echo in the bathroom. The phones have a signature ring to them, so it couldn't have been a coincidence. Either way, he only started creeping on me once the phone ring made it clear that I was an employee. The situation really creeped me out, and I've been totally unfocused on my work since then. I kept prowling the garden area to look out for any old man wearing a similar outfit to the creeper. I have an incredibly hard time distinguishing faces, so I probably won't even recognize him, even if I did see him. Creepy bathroom peeper, let's not meet again.
It was about 2 a.m., and I was leaving a buddy's house after a get-together to catch up. I've made this walk at least a few hundred times at all hours of the day and late at night, so I was fairly confident in my safety. The walk was short, maybe 29 to 30 minutes, more or less. I was wearing a backpack with random stuff inside of it, so I had a bit of a load. I was a little stoned considering I smoked a bit before leaving, so I decided to listen to something on YouTube. I wanted to switch things up from listening to music, so I decided to listen to scary stories. I loaded up a corpse husband video and put in my headphones. I'm walking and listening, and I kid you not, 2 minutes into the video, I hear a voice behind me. "Hey you, half and half." I instantly know he means me because of my hair. I have it split dyed, half black and half blonde. I casually look behind me while I'm walking, and I see who called out to me. There were 3 men following me. All of them were tall and dressed in dark clothes. One of them was holding a pipe or a bat. I couldn't tell. "Stop walking and drop your bag. We have a gun." My heart was in my throat. I was terrified. I looked around ahead of me and I saw a police officer amongst a few cars. He was in the four-way traffic a few dozen yards ahead of us. I silently prayed for it to turn down my road, but it continued forward. I zoned out on the police car and didn't notice the men getting closer. I heard one of them getting very close, and I took off as fast as I could. I ran across the four-way near the high school and hopped a few fences and ran through backyards, anything to get as far away as possible. I got a few blocks away and got to the road, only to be greeted by a police officer. "Get on the ground now!" He had a taser drawn and a flashlight in my eyes. I immediately complied and got to the ground. He asked me why I was running and hopping fences at 2 a.m., and I told him I was trying to get away from people that were trying to attack me. He paused for a second and told me to stand up. I stood up and he looked at me and said, "Were you just walking up 5th Street?" "Yeah, officer, I was." "Were you the officer I saw with the cars?" I replied. He nodded and told me he had seen the men behind me. I told him my routing, so he understood why I was trespassing so many yards, and he told me I wasn't in trouble since I was fleeing for safety. He had me describe the men as much as possible and proceeded to radio everything in. Afterwards, he followed me home in his car, never more than 2 blocks away. I got home safe and thanked him. I didn't sleep much that night.
In 2010, I was 12 years old. My brother played baseball. I would attend the summer tournaments to play with friends on the nearby playground or in the woods. My mum worked in the concession stand, and my dad was a coach. One day, during the tournament games, I wandered into the woods further than I'd been before. This wasn't a big, vast forest. It was in the middle of a suburb, although, as a kid, it seemed massive. I found a treehouse, but I was too scared to explore it alone, so I went back later with friends. We climbed inside the treehouse, and it was everything a kid could have wanted. After a while, we got bored and left, but as we were leaving, I felt like we were being watched. We started walking away from the treehouse, and two men burst from the bushes. We were a small trio of 12-year-old girls, and we started running and screaming. I tried not to look back, but when I did, I saw something in their hands. I just kept running. My friend, who wore flip-flops, tripped and fell. We all stopped running and looked back. We were so close to the field, but still hidden by the vegetation and tall grass. We were unseen by all the adults seated on the bleachers. They caught up to us fast, and we were screaming and crying. They had hatchets, but all they said was, "We just really didn't want you to go into our deer blind." They looked sheepish and nervous, realizing how close people were nearby. They took off, and we all told our dads, sobbing. They ran into the woods with baseball bats, combing the forest, not finding anything, and they accused us of lying. Now that I'm an adult, I realize that was not a deer blind. It was a treehouse deliberately put into the middle of the woods so that children would go inside. I often ask myself what could have happened to me if I had the courage to go into that treehouse alone.
A few months ago, around 7 a.m., I was heading to the grocery store to buy my younger sister a sandwich. The guy working there is great at what he does, even if he has a bit of an attitude towards everyone at times. So I ordered the sandwich and got her a little snack to have during lunch along with it. The store was empty when I came in, but got pretty packed in no time. There was a school right across the street from it, so lots of parents were buying things for their kids before the 8 o'clock mark. Eventually the sandwich was done, and I took it, paid for my stuff, and started leaving. When I was exiting the store, some guy started following me. I didn't think much of it, obviously, but when I got out and was starting to cross the street, the guy called out to me. I didn't really hear him. He spoke a bit low, so I stopped where I was and looked at him, confused. He got close to me and was clearly not mentally stable. Either that or he was high. I recognized his face, remembering that he lives in my neighborhood and got arrested some time ago for some reason. He went off, saying, "You were talking crap about me? I'll beat the crap out of you," and things like that. He had one hand in his pocket, so I feared he may have a weapon. Knowing my area, he most likely did. My heart started going nuts, but I was still confused. I had never even talked about the guy, much less in a negative light. So I tried to explain that to him, but he wasn't having any of it. He told me, "Next time I see you outside, I'm gonna mess you up." I started walking off, not really sure what I should be doing in a situation like this. It was the first time this had happened, and I was just trying to get home, which was only about a block away. After I got across the street, he threw a bottle at me. Luckily, it missed. After that, I walked a bit faster, getting to the corner and making my turn. I walked down the sideway and looked back when I was about to cross the street again. He was there, staring at me. I don't know what he was doing, but I made another turn at the next corner so he couldn't look at me anymore. I got to my house and told my mom and a friend she had over. We went to the police station and they said there was nothing they could do. The police here are kind of known for being useless.
I've never shared this story with anyone, as I was always too afraid to be judged for it, so it's something I buried down until my friend brought it up the other day. We both have daughters, and we were talking about how we could educate them on being safe when they are teenagers and experimenting with partying. When my best friend and I were 17 years old, we went to the beach for spring break with a couple of our guy friends. My friend was talking to this guy she had met through mutual friends, and he wanted us to meet up with him at a house he and his friends had rented together. Our guy friends had ditched us to meet girls, so we decided to go ahead and go to her friend's house to hang out with them. When we get there, it was in the middle of the day, and he took us inside and introduced us to everyone. Turns out, almost all the guys were on a basketball team at the same university. We all hung out, and they were all drinking. My friend and I weren't. One guy came out with 2 glasses of what appeared to be whiskey and coke. Against my better judgment, I started to sip it, as did my friend. There was one guy who appeared to not be athletic, and he was the only person at the house who was not friendly towards us. I'll call him Mike. Suddenly, I start to feel very buzzed. We were laughing and talking, and one guy asked me to put on his jersey. I grabbed it and put it on over my clothes. "No, take off your clothes and put it on," he said in an aggressive tone. I was feeling more tipsy at this point, and I knew something was very wrong. Our parents had let us drink with them multiple times. I knew what it was like to be drunk. I knew how much I could handle before I was drunk, and one drink never made me feel like I was getting wasted. "Quit babysitting that drink. Drink up, weakling," one guy said as they all laughed. Even though I had stopped drinking, I could still feel more and more buzzed, especially since our drink barely tasted of any whiskey. My dad always had whiskey at home, and we would drink a couple of whiskey Pepsis on occasion. I would feel relaxed, but this was much different. "We should go. Our friends are waiting for us." I headed to the door, and a couple of guys stood in front of us. No, you can't leave. Come sit down over here for a little bit," as they ushered us back to the couch. This sinking feeling hit my gut, and I knew we were on borrowed time. Trying to stay calm, I laughed and said, "I need to pee. Come with me?" I grabbed my friend's hand, and we went to the restroom together. We both stood there, and we had already read each other's minds. I put my hands on her head and looked her in the eye so we could both focus. We need to leave now. Our phones both had spotty service all over the island. I'm guessing because there was so many people packed onto it. "Take my keys and tell them you're going to get your purse and I'll stay here. You go get the guys and come back for me," I said. I knew this plan probably wouldn't work, but my mind was going crazy. As I opened the bathroom door, Mike was standing there. My heart sank. He was rude to us earlier, and he probably heard us talking. "Follow me and be quiet," he said. Something inside me trusted him with everything I had in that moment. We followed him down the hallway to the garage and out of the front driveway. "Hurry up and get out of here now," he said. We ran to the car, and I drove to our hotel. I remember driving, but I don't remember getting to our condo. The rest of the story is from our guy friends telling us what happened. Apparently, we walked in and the guys asked us where we had been because it was already nighttime, and we were supposed to meet up to barbecue some weenies. They said we didn't say a word, just walked into our room and closed the door and passed out. We didn't come out until the next day, and both of us had excruciating headaches, as if we drank a whole bottle of cheap vodka by ourselves. To the basketball douchebags who tried to take advantage of 2 teenage girls, let's never meet again. And thank you, Mike. I wish I could thank you. I hope you're out there hearing this, and you remember the brunette and blonde little girls you saved that day.
About 5 or 6 years ago, me and my friends were freshmen in high school. We frequently went into the woods near our school that had some abandoned structures. Sometimes we went in there to smoke, graffiti, or just otherwise explore. It was always a pretty fun time. On one fall day after school, we decided to go exploring in the woods, as we usually would do. For the first 10 or 15 minutes into our adventure, everything was normal. Then eventually, we came across a tree that had a dagger sticking out of it. I immediately got a horrible feeling. One of my friends, Nathan, went over to the tree and took the dagger out, and sure enough, it was 100% real. I'm not exactly sure what I was thinking, but part of me was hoping it was some sort of gag toy. We all just kind of looked at each other. We were a little weirded out, but didn't think much of it. Maybe thought someone left it there before we came, to mess with whoever came across it. At least, that's what we were all hoping for. Nathan put the dagger in his backpack and off we went. It wasn't long after we came across the tree that things started to get weird. I was the first to notice it. There was a man in all black following us, keeping a good distance away. He was always to the right of us, hiding behind some trees. From what I could see, he looked to be an average height man, wearing a black hoodie, black jeans, and black boots. I wanted to leave the second I saw him, but when I told my friends what I'd seen, I don't think any of them believed me. They just kind of laughed it off. Either they thought I was seeing things, or they thought someone was just messing with us and didn't feel very threatened by it. By the time we were about 40 minutes into the woods was when they finally saw him. This time he was a lot closer, about 30 feet away from us. I still couldn't make out much detail about his face because he had his hood on and his head down, although I could see that he was wearing a white t-shirt underneath his hoodie. Everyone froze for a brief moment, and we just stared, not really sure what to do about the situation. We all just stood there in silence for about 3 very long, very scary seconds, until he ran further back into the woods behind some trees, and we could no longer see him. I grabbed onto Nathan's arm, who was the closest to me, and said, "We have to go now." I had a horrible pit in my stomach. At first, we made our way back to the entrance of the woods at a jogging pace. I think we were all trying to downplay the experience in our minds to not invoke pure fear and panic. We kept at that pace for a minute or two until we heard leaves crunching and sticks breaking behind us. We turn around and there he is, trailing us. We start running and he starts chasing us. I was the one behind the group, so the man was closest to me and I could hear his heavy breathing. That's how close he was, an arm's length away. We picked up our speed and I thought for sure I was going to pass out because I was fairly out of shape, but luckily we made it out in about 25 minutes, stopping once or twice to catch our breath when the man wasn't in sight. Once we all got out, we just kind of looked at each other, trying to figure out what had just happened. We didn't talk about it much after that. I don't think any of us wanted to think about it for too long. Looking back on it now, we probably should have reported it to the police in case that man tried to hurt any other innocent kids, but unfortunately the thought didn't cross our minds. I don't know if it was him who placed the dagger in the tree or why it was there, and honestly I don't want to think about it. I don't know why he was there or what his intentions were. I'm just glad we got away, and I hope he hasn't hurt or tried to hurt anyone since.
This happened in the summer of 2008, I think. I was at a sleepover birthday party at my friend's house. That's going to require some explanation. I live in rural western Pennsylvania. All you need to know about that side of the state is that if you aren't living in Pittsburgh or Erie, you're probably living in an oil town that went bust decades ago. Oh, and you're probably isolated in a forest somewhere too. My family did okay in spite of the economically depressed area we lived in. Now, my friend had money. His family weren't Wall Street investors or anything, but in a town like mine, it was noticeable. He had a big house, a huge yard, a tree house, a trampoline, big screen TVs everywhere, and every video game console ever. You might think I was only friends with this kid because of the stuff he had, but honestly, that isn't true. He's probably in the top 5 of the nicest people I've ever met. His family is also amazing. They took me in for a while when my mum was in the hospital once. I still keep in touch with them. So, rich guy, good guy, etc. He has a lot of friends. His birthday parties were pretty legendary among kids in our town. Usually they involved one of those closed canopy tents outside with movie projectors inside, along with a soft serve ice cream machine and slushy machine. The party in 2008 was a little more low-key. I think my friend was turning 14 and I was 13. There were a few less people than normal, and there weren't any tents or projectors. We played video games for the first part of the night, and then started to play flashlight tag when it got dark. I know that the rules to flashlight tag can vary depending on who's playing. My friend and I used to play it like group hide and seek. The hiders would go hide in the dark, sometimes alone and sometimes together if there was a great spot. The seekers got the flashlights, and also some cool walkie-talkies. As I said before, the yard we played in was huge, and there were a lot of places to hide. The first hour or so was pretty uneventful. We mostly hid around the treehouse, as well as climbing some of the trees inside the yard itself. The only thing we had to worry about was when a cop car drove by. Obviously, we weren't doing anything illegal, but we just didn't want to have to explain why we were sneaking around a house at 11 o'clock at night with flashlights. My friend's yard ends in some pretty thick woods. My own house, which is a couple of miles down the road, has some wooded area around it as well, but not like this. After you leave my friend's yard, there is about 15 to 20 miles of wilderness before the next town. He does have neighbors on one side, and all of this is going to become important in a little bit. At this particular time, I was one of the seekers. My group and I were waiting in the house for the other group to hide. We were mostly drinking slushies and messing around. We had just come out of the house and started our search when we heard a lot of yelling. Suddenly, the entire other group came rushing back into the house. They went inside, and my group, really confused at this point, followed them in. It took a few minutes for everyone to calm down and explain what was happening. Their story went like this. That round, they all decided to hide back in the woods, since we hadn't been back there yet. They had gone a number of places inside, but were still in sight of the house. Looking further inside the woods, they caught sight of a figure at the edge of their vision. It took them a little while to figure out what they were looking at in the dark. They thought it might be a tree or a deer or something, but they kept focusing on it. When they were sure that the shape was human, they started yelling and sprinting back to the house. When everyone was finally inside and mostly settled down, I was freaking out along with some of the other boys. A few of the people in my group, including my friend who was throwing the party, were skeptical. They were pretty sure that the other group was just trying to scare us. In fact, my friend was almost angry about it. He was going to march off to the woods to check the situation out himself. They stopped him and said that they should only go back there to check as a group or to wake his parents who were asleep upstairs. Most of the people who hadn't gone into the woods actually found this to be pretty fun in a weird way. It was like being in a thriller movie. Plus, we were in a low crime rate neighborhood, and there were enough of us that one unarmed person shouldn't have bothered us. Even if it was a hoax, it would be a fun scare. We came up with a plan to investigate the woods. The majority of the guys decided to go back into the woods with flashlights and walkie-talkies. They also planned to bring a friend's dog, but that didn't work out. The dog was a golden retriever collie mix, and was the furthest thing from a guard dog, unless you feared being licked to death. He also got most of his exercise by fetching tennis balls in the big yard, so he was not used to being led on a leash. I waited at the house with another scaredy cat kid, with the other walkie-talkie, ready to wake up my friend's parents or call the cops. I wasn't taking the situation very well, but didn't really show it. I tend to seem pretty calm on the outside when I'm usually a nervous wreck on the inside. I at least attempted to calm the other scaredy cat down. After a few minutes and some excited chatter on the walkie-talkie, the investigators returned in a similar state to the original first group. There was a lot of shouting, and it took a few minutes to get the story straight. This is what happened to them. They had gone to the edge of the woods like the original first group had done. It took a few minutes of searching since the figure had been spotted in the thicker brush that wasn't easy to reach. One of the kids had swung his flashlight around until he caught sight of something, before yelling and running back to the house. Some of the other boys, who had gotten the same glimpse inside the flashlight beam, behaved similarly. They confirmed that they had seen a person. He was mostly obscured behind a small tree. The features that they could make out from that brief moment were that of a male who was on the taller side with longish hair. One of the boys who had seen him thought he might be wearing some light flannel. Apparently, he had made no move to approach them and had just cocked his head out a little to stare them down out from behind the tree. It was at this point that my friend's mum finally came downstairs after all the commotion. He explained the situation to her. Afterwards, she locked all the doors and told us to stay inside and tell her if we saw anything else. She explained that the part of the woods we were going into was probably not their land anyway. They just had the closest house to it. Needless to say, I did not sleep well that night. We were situated on air mattresses in my friend's game room. The really frightened kid actually took to sleeping underneath one. Just before sunrise, I finally drifted off for a few hours. When I came to, everyone else was awake and eating pancakes on the patio. My friend's mum was with them. She had checked the woods that morning and had not seen anything amiss. We were all a little on edge, but things were pretty normal besides that. When my parents came to pick me up, I was reminded of the fact that I only lived about 2 miles from my friend's house. It was a walk that took 10 minutes or less. Even at home, I struggled to sleep for a while. I just kept thinking of how easy it would be for the man in the woods to show up in my yard. Fast forward a couple of weeks later, and I'm playing video games at my friend's house again. I bring up the subject, but he was very dismissive of it. It was strange, but he was really pretty short with me. It was like he wanted me to drop it. None of his behavior fit his normal personality at all. He did come up with a short explanation though. Apparently, one of his neighbors had a son a few years older than us. He was tall with long hair. My friend explains that he could be a jerk and was pretty weird. The way he said weird may have indicated some mental condition. My friend's explanation was that this kid had seen us playing and hid in the woods to scare us. That didn't make me feel any better at first. It did seem reasonable on the surface, and there's a good chance that's actually what happened. However, there are a few things that don't sit right with me. In my experience, when someone's trying to scare you, there's a haha gotcha moment at the end. Like, most people want to reveal that the whole thing was good-natured, or they just want to show you how dumb you look over nothing. Back when we had our sleepovers in tents, one of my friend's older brothers would rustle the outside before popping in to see if he had scared us. Both of his brothers had moved out of the house by the night of the incident. This person in the woods did nothing like that. He may have just been trying to scare us and went all in on the whole thing, wherein his only pleasure was knowing that he had scared us for life. Or if this kid really did have problems, maybe he just didn't understand how pranks typically went. His explanation also brought back an old memory of mine. I had been going to my friend's house for close to 10 years at that point. In one of the early years, I remember playing a game with my friend and one of his neighbors who lived across the street. Both my friend and the neighbor had crabapple trees in their yards. We played a game of basically dodgeball with moldy apples thrown across the road. The game ended when the neighbor, who was a few years older, chucked a crabapple at my friend's head as hard as he could. It absolutely nailed my friend, and he was on the ground crying. I brought him inside, where his parents asked me what was wrong. I told them about the game and the neighbor kid. When he had finished crying and said that they had warned him about this, they just said that the neighbor kid was not nice. For the record, he didn't have long hair, but this was a number of years prior to the incident. Now, I don't know if this was the neighbor that my friend had pinned the blame on. Which brings me to some other disturbing things. My friend never gave me the suspect's name, even when I pressed him on it. More unsettling was the fact that my friend was not among the kids who had actually seen the guy directly. This was just his explanation for what happened. I don't think my friend was actually trying to cover anything. I think he was just worried that I wouldn't want to come to his house anymore if I didn't feel safe. That was the last time I had a sleepover at my friend's house. That wasn't really because of the incident, but because we were entering high school, and overnight parties started meaning something else entirely. My friend's explanation does seem plausible, but that makes a pretty creepy story on its own. The alternatives are even more frightening. I don't even want to think about what kind of guys go to stalk teenagers in the woods in the middle of the night. So, whether you are a creepy neighbor or a creepy mystery person, let's not meet.
It all started a couple of years ago. I was a sophomore in high school and I was hanging out with an extremely toxic and emotionally manipulative acquaintance named Holly, who, let's just say, wasn't shy about getting money from her manipulative ways. Such ways included scamming older men for their money from fake dating profiles she made of other girls in our grade that she didn't like. She also stole from her parents and bummed money and things from her other friends. She'd been doing this for years. Sure, we could have been considered friends, but I was much closer to my best friend Carter. Carter had been best friends with Holly since freshman year, and honestly, the only reason I hung out with her was because Carter insisted on inviting her to our hangouts every time. Holly was not a good person, and I quietly put up with her antics. One day she starts talking about her friend Sarah. Awesome, but honestly, I really didn't care, especially knowing Carter and her ditched me for her. I wasn't really paying attention to the story until Holly asked me if I wanted to sell my socks for money. What the heck? She smiles and proceeds to tell me how they found a super senior who bought knee-high socks for $90. All Sarah did was have to wear them outside for an entire day. The only thing was, the super senior insisted on meeting in person only. Holly laughed, telling me it was a little weird. Okay, red flag number 1. Holly never really thought things were weird, unless they were really weird. Then she proceeds to tell me that this super senior was trying to get her in his house the entire time, but finally gave up, and they left. You're probably thinking, what the hell? Who'd be dumb enough to try to wrangle money from this freak? Me. I'm the idiot. All I really heard was $90 for a pair of old worn socks. I was in. Being the amazing friends they were, Holly and Carter just laughed and informed me that I'd have to do it on my own since they had better things to do, whatever that meant. They gave me his Instagram handle and wished me luck. Well, we had a problem right off the bat. You see, I had totaled my car around a month before and had no vehicle of my own. Well, being the dummy that I was and still am, I decided, hey, let's just take my mom's car. So I start messaging this Kyle on Instagram, explaining my situation and how I got in contact with him. I can't remember most of the conversation, but I can remember the guy being really insistent on meeting at his apartment complex. Red flag number 2. Although I'm very stupid and naive at times, I at least had common sense. I brushed it off and suggested other local areas, but this guy wasn't backing down. Finally, after much convincing, I get Kyle to agree to meet in a nearby park, right by his house. Red flag number 3. So I convinced my mom to allow me to drive her car, and I meet up with Kyle at the park. It's mostly deserted, but it's by a busy street, so I don't feel too uncomfortable. That's when I met Kyle. He was a huge, fat, and sweaty guy with a beard who reeked to high hell. He was at least 19, but looked like he could be pushing mid-20s. That's when I knew I made a mistake, but there was no way I was going to say no to $90. I awkwardly greeted him and formal pleasantries were exchanged. I don't remember much of the weird conversation, other than a couple of highlights. Number 1, the dude brought a rope. It turns out he was into bounding feet as well, and I was super creeped out. He then starts to tie my feet together after I mumbled a weak agreement. All I remember is staring at the sun, wishing I would die right there and then. Number 2, this guy had the nerve to call my feet ugly while rubbing and massaging them. That kinda hurt, I'm not gonna lie. Number 3, he was insistent on showing me his knife collection back at home, and he'd pay me extra to come with him. Yeah, no, that wasn't gonna happen. I knew what that meant, and I wanted no part in it. Number 4, he straight up sniffed my socks after I gave them to him. No shame whatsoever. He told me he liked the vinegar smell. Yeah, it turns out the socks used to belong to my now deceased grandfather. I just grabbed a random knee-high pair from my sock drawer. Number 5, after refusing Kyle multiple times to come back to his house, he only gave me a third of the price we agreed on, since I refused to come home with him. Whatever. I was disgusted and disturbed anyways, and wanted to get out of there. After returning home and getting my butt chewed out by my mom, I promptly blocked the guy and called my friends to tell them about the experience. Much to my surprise, Holly informed me about something she forgot me about. Apparently the guy had made several threats of shooting up his high school's graduation and was very well known to the local police. Although I thought this was over and done with, my junior year of high school, I received threatening and grotesque phone calls in which I reported to the police. Carter and Holly were also called and threatened. While mine were more of a sexual nature, theirs involved being called extremely specific slurs, and he even recited Holly's address. Although I never found out who made them, and there was a good chance Holly could have orchestrated the whole thing herself, I can't help but wonder if Kyle was behind them.
It all started with a normal day at work. I worked in a small grocery store at the time, and my duties consisted of gathering shopping carts in the parking lot and bagging groceries. Normal minimum wage stuff. It was rainy that morning, and of course, I was assigned to the carts all day. About 2 hours into my shift, I saw a man rushing to get his groceries into the car. It was pouring. I ran over to him and started helping him with his bags. "It's pouring," I said. "Mind if I help you get out of the rain?" "Yes, thank you so much." As he was closing his trunk, he looked at me with a very surprised look on his face. He lowered his eyebrows, looking me up and down, and smirked. "Are you a new hire?" "No, I've been here for a couple of months." "Oh, you're very pretty," he said in a weirdly sensual tone. "Thank you, have a good day." I shut it down. I was not interested. As I was walking back to the store to hide until he left, I could feel him watching me while I walked away. Nevertheless, I continued to work, not really thinking about it. After my lunch, I was at the register bagging groceries, and I noticed that same man from earlier walk in. I pretended I didn't see him and just kept bagging. He came up to the register and got a single chocolate bar. I didn't give him a bag, and he stands towering over me and says, "Aren't you going to bag my item?" "Oh, sorry, I didn't know you wanted a bag for just one thing." I put his chocolate bar in a bag and told him to have a good day. "When are you off work, sweetheart?" Man, I'm not comfortable giving that information out." He returned with, "That's okay. You've been here for what, 5 hours? You probably get off around 6 or 7, right?" He smiled, winked at me, and walked away. Disgusted, I went to my manager and told her what had happened. She told me not to work the lot anymore, and to ask someone to walk me to my car. So, by the end of my shift, I had a male co-worker walk with me to my truck, and we scanned the parking lot, looking for this man's car. We didn't see him, so my co-worker went back inside, and I started my truck. I called my mum to tell her about what happened, and once she answered, I left the parking lot. Literally, the second I turned onto the road, I saw his car pull onto the road behind me. I told my mum I thought he was going to follow me, so she told me to drive around a bit and try and lose him. I drove around for about 20 minutes, going in circles around my town. I hit a red light, and he pulled up next to me and started yelling something to me out of his open window. I, of course, pretended he wasn't there, but I could still hear what he was saying. "You would bear some good kids for me. You'd make a great slave for me, little lady." He then started being very explicit about what he was going to do to me if he caught me. I told my mum I was going to call 911, and if I wasn't home in an hour, then call the police. While I was trying to dial 911, the man speeds ahead of my truck and starts brake checking me. Frantic, I wait for the closest intersection and turn up the block. My phone fell under my seat while I was turning, so I decided to go to the nearest open establishment and run in and hide and have someone else call 911. The closest open business I could find was a convenience store at a gas station. I pull in, park, and run for my life into the store. I tell the clerk what's happening, and she takes me to the break room and locks me in there. While processing that I might have survived this ordeal, I hear the doors at the storefront start violently rattling, and before I knew it, the clerk was locking herself in the break room too. She was on the phone with the police, and they were on their way. We were silent, cowering in a dark room. I found myself feeling guilty for wrapping another woman into our worst fear. My thoughts were racing through what I said to him. Did I lead him on? No, I just told him to have a good day. Has he been following me for longer than tonight? How did he know what car I drive? Are the police going to get here in time? Are we going to die? Finally, the small room is illuminated with red and blue lights from the crack under the door. We hear a voice over the intercom telling us it's safe to come out. Shaking, the clerk takes out her keys and opens the door. We walk out and give our statements. After the police leave, I turn to my unexpected savior and profusely thank her. We cry, hug, and she walks me to my car. The next night, I went back and brought her some food and an Amazon gift card. I've been in a near-fatal car accident. I've been 10 feet away from a mountain lion in the wild. I can tell you, with total honesty, I thought that was the end of my line. Stay aware, be cautious, and stay safe.